So absolutely enormous chaos leaks here today. We've got the rules changes for the core Dark Pacts rule, what's staying and what's going in terms of data sheets, some powerful stratagems for the Alpha Legion, new rules for the Firebrand, a whole slew of datasheet changes for better and worse, and some super dangerous Black Legion and tanky Iron Warriors. Let's take a look at some of the massive changes from Codex Chaos Space Marines. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos, and in this video I thought I'd go through a few of the major leaks from the upcoming Codex, the one that's going on pre-order this weekend. In this video I thought we'd just talk through a few of the biggest points as to the rules that are going to be coming out, some of the things that hadn't been revealed up to now. Basically the whole Codex seems to have leaked online again, as seems to be tradition for Games Workshop's releases, and hopefully I'll try and make a full Codex review fairly shortly. It's a very big book with lots to go at, so I thought I'd just round up a few of the most exciting and interesting points here in this video. Obviously it's a pretty big weekend for Chaos Collectors. Not only do we have the Codex, but we have those big battle forces going up for pre-order as well. If you were looking to pick them up, then I've got links down in the video description to a bunch of discount retailers, and these are the times that the battle forces are going to be going live worldwide. If you're certain that you are picking up either Dread Talons or those veterans of the Long War, I'd try and get there early. I feel like the majority of discount retailers are going to sell out of this quite quickly, and then it'll be falling back to the Games Workshop web store, unless Games Workshop do surprise us and actually make enough of the in-demand box sets for once. There'll also be the actual Codex and the Combat Patrol, of course. Always better to pick things up at a discount versus the Games Workshop web store if you have the option. And of course an absolutely massive thank you to any of you folks who are buying things through the links in the video description when you pick up some Warhammer stuff. It does go to help support the channel at no additional cost to yourself. Let's get into the good stuff though, and we'll start off with the army rule, which is Dark Pacts, something that did sound like it might have been slightly tweaked from the index to the codex, and indeed it has been, but it still really keeps the flavour of the rule and it's still very powerful, though admittedly it is overall nerfed since before. As per previous, whenever your Chaos Space Marines attack the enemy, provided they've got this special rule, they can either choose to gain lethal hits or sustained hits. They can opt to make a Dark Pact with the Chaos Gods to make that happen, though of course that comes with a risk. You roll your 2d6 on the leadership test. If you happen to be lower than your leadership value, so often a 5 or less, then you take some mortal wounds for your trouble, your squad taking d3 of them. Usually that means that there's around about a 1/4 chance of taking that damage, and it's often well worth paying, and I still think it will be. The difference is though that you now take the damage prior to your unit dealing damage itself. So say for example if you had a Havoc squad taking the Dark Pacts, if they happen to fail that leadership test and take the d3 mortal wounds, it means that say if you lost a model to the Dark Pact mortal wounds, that individual model wouldn't be able to strike, so you would have lost a bit of damage output for your unit. I think for some units that matters far more than others. Certainly big single models don't really matter too much, as you're not actually likely to kill your own unit outright with Dark Pacts, so it's still pretty much the same as it was before there. It's going to be most relevant if the Dark Pact has got a pretty reasonable chance of killing one of your own models if you fail, so maybe extra relevant for smaller 2 wound or 1 wound miniatures versus the bigger 3 or 4 wound type ones. Overall it's still a powerful rule, and the Pactbound Zealots special rule can still make it better, though again that has been subtly nerfed since the indexed attachment, even if it broadly keeps the same sort of flavour. Otherwise, another big question were what datasheets are staying and going. It looks like we've gained the Jump Pack Chaos Lord and the Cultist Firebrand, and that meant that 3 datasheets were going away. As expected and Games Workshop announced, we've lost access to Lucius the Eternal and Noise Marines within the core codex. They'll be in the digital download index for Emperor's Children until they get their own book release. I was expecting it would either be the Exalted Champion or Huron Blackheart to go away, given that neither of those are on sale from Games Workshop's web store. It does seem that the Exalted Champion is the one who's taking the fall. I guess if you have one of those, maybe run it in proxy for a Chaos Lord or other support character like a Master of Executions perhaps. You'd still be fine to use the model. You could even just throw him in as a unit champion if you fancied. Otherwise it does mean that Huron Blackheart survives. He's still here in the book, which is really nice I think. I really could see him getting an updated character sculpt model at some point in the future. He's quite a big and exciting character in the lore, and he's been dealing with his slightly dated model for far too long at this point, even before he went out of production. Otherwise, looking at detachments, the Deceptors are the Alpha Legion style detachment. Their core rule is to put lots of legionaries and cultist units in the midboard with infiltrate, though I feel like, as expected, their stratagems are really interesting. For some highlights, I really like their detonator one. This is a sort of return to form from their previous rule sets in 8th and 9th edition, automatically triggering Deadly Demise for a vehicle that you've destroyed, though this time to unlock it you need to have one of your character models within 18 inches of that vehicle or monster or whatever. This one could be really fun, potentially if you could lay an enemy vehicle low in the midst of an enemy formation and have one of your characters coordinate, that could genuinely scatter out some massive mortal wounds, particularly if it's a massive great big D6 explosion. It is locked to non-Titanic models, so no doing this on Imperial Knights and things unfortunately, but I still think it's fun. Otherwise for stratagem highlights, I feel like that pick them off one seems extra good. You just get to reroll all hit rolls when shooting, which is great for 1 CP to start with. But then if any wound rolls target enemy units that are below starting strength, you get to reroll wound rolls as well. That's actually a surprisingly easy thing to trigger. You just need to ping off a wound off a tough enemy vehicle or kill one squad member with something else before you trigger this. This looks absolutely nasty. Seems pretty terrifying on something like a Forge Fiend with a whole bunch of general purpose firepower. There's no locking to infantry on this. Otherwise they've got a few other fun ones, Relentless Pursuit for infantry units to get a 6-inch reactive move, and maybe recoil from enemies moving within 9 inches, fall back and shoot, and one to prevent enemy units setting up within 12 inches when they're deep striking, though I guess you'd have to have pretty good prediction as to where they even wanted to go, otherwise you might be just throwing CP at something the opponent wasn't even going to try. Out of these ones I think that big shooting one seems like one of the most interesting, reactive moves are always great, and I must admit, just for sheer fun factor, that detonator one could be pretty huge. It does feel like, in the right situation, that could be absolutely worth the setup of getting the character close. Next up, I'm certainly curious as to the new datasheets, and as mentioned, Games Workshop has added the Cultist Firebrand as a minor support character, the Blackstone Fortress style sculpture that came in their sort of slightly smaller cultist unit there. He's a toughness 4 character with 4 wounds and a 4+ save. He can join Accursed Cultist or the Cultist mob, and gets the damned and grenade keywords to be able to throw a few mortal wounds about if he needs to. It's basically got a great big heavy flamer with near enough double the shots, strength 5, AP 1 and damage 1, and a big D6 plus 3 auto hits on the enemy. I guess in theory could be nasty enough for a bit of Overwatch, though the cultist unit did unfortunately get worse for that. He gets a bunch of strength 4 attacks in melee, nothing to write home about there, and then his special rules are reroll leadership for cultists, and one infantry unit hit by the pike must take a battle shock test, which maybe has kind of limited value in your own turn for the most part. Overall, unless this guy is ridiculously cheap on the final digital points download, I can't really see him being particularly great. I guess he could make Dark Pacts a bit more reliable for cultists and things, which might be relevant in that Chaos Cult detachment. Beyond that though, he's not really adding a whole ton just besides raw damage. A single big heavy flamer isn't the most exciting for that, even if it can be pretty nasty against 1 wound infantry. For datasheet rewrites, Cypher got a whole ton of changes. His pre-codex points went down to 90 points, which I thought was quite nice. I do wonder if those points updates might be partly due to datasheet changes from the codex, and Games Workshop were getting ahead of themselves a bit. Cypher's the main Chaos Space Marine lone operative, and his datasheet changed in 3 main ways. He got a really big melee buff, but I'd say arguably his other 2 rules have been toned down a bit. In the shooting phase, he's still the same as he was, blazing away with a whole ton of pistols with the assault keyword, and they also get sustained hits 1, 3 plasma shots, and 3 strength 4 AP1 shots from the bolt gun. Now though, as well as getting them in range, he'll also get them in melee as well, so potentially between shooting and charging, Cypher could do a really big number on any sort of medium infantry sort of units. That'd be 6 plasma style shots in total, plus a big 12 bolt pistol shots if he can then shoot and charge something. That could be a pretty reasonable chance of just wiping out an entire 5-strong unit of Space Marines or something similar to that, and should do a really nasty number on hordes. This honestly seems very nice for a lone operative. Otherwise though, I'd say his other 2 abilities are worse than they were before. Agent of Discord has flipped to being a 1 command point extra tax on battle tactics for enemy units within 12 inches. Previously it was one of those Ruinous Stratagem type abilities, which I think on balance was probably more powerful, as that could affect something anywhere on the table. It's still not awful though. The few times when this does actually matter, it could be super annoying for the foe, could prevent some CP rerolls. Otherwise his guns blazing rule is when he gets to return fire with admittedly quite a lot of good shots. He previously could do that multiple times per turn if he was allowed to, now it's just once per turn. When he or another unit within 3 inches gets shot, he can return fire at that unit with those nasty pistols. Overall pretty fun though. I feel like he's going to feel a lot more dynamic and massively more dangerous, blasting a bunch of enemies in the shooting phase and then again in the fight phase. Another one of the detachments I was very keen to see the rules for were the Veterans of the Long War. This one seems to be the Chaos Elite Force that's Black Legion themed. I did suspect that from Games Workshop's teasers they'd be borrowing something from the Space Marine lineup, either Oath of Moment or Combat Doctrines, and it seems what they've stolen is the Loyalist Oath of Moment. Their rule is now Focus of Hatred. Choose one of the enemy units in the command phase, and then you get to re-roll hit rolls against it for your Heretic Astartes, excluding damned models. That's really quite a nasty buff to stack with Dark Pacts as well, means that you could be getting both sustained hits or lethal hits, and also Focus of Hatred rerolls. It does mean that they should just be extra nasty at punishing one tough enemy unit each turn when they need to, extra good if the enemy's got some big Titanic models or maybe Terminator Death Star type units. Otherwise, seems that isn't the only Loyalist trick that they're stealing, given that they've got Armour of Contempt. Contemptuous Disregard is a battle tactic stratagem, so it means that you could get that free with Chaos Lords, really nice on Terminators or Chosen and things, or just make them far tougher. Really quite good on anything with good armor saves like Land Raiders or Hellbrutes as well. Otherwise, for 2 CP, there's Bringers of Despair. This one gives you fights first against the enemy unit that's your Focus of Hatred. This one feels like it's situational, but could be absolutely enormous in the right circumstances. If you nominate a unit and you've got a massive scary unit of Chaos Terminators or Chosen or something, and then they come to charge you, it means that you could threaten to wipe them out before they even attacked, doubling down on the fact that you'll get both Dark Pacts and full rerolls against them, as well as striking first and just killing a bunch of them either way. Maybe feels like a bit of a big brain move, as I guess it means that you haven't destroyed your Focus of Hatred here. But in the right confrontation, that does feel like it could be pretty crucial. Finally, seems to have also got a reactive move similar to the Alpha Legion, moving an infantry or mounted unit 6 inches when the enemies move within 9 inches of you. Again, can be great for hiding behind terrain or backpedaling from enemy charges. Overall, I think this looks like a pretty solid detachment, a nice damage dealer rule that's very easy to use, lots of good support stratagems. They've also got a 2 CP one to allow you to redeclare your Focus of Hatred against something else should you kill it, and you have the CP to spare. One unit that was sorely in need of attention was Vashtorr the Archifane. He was perhaps one of the single weakest units in Codex Chaos Space Marines, given that he was neither particularly threatening on his profile nor gave you some particularly good boosts. I guess it remains to be seen if they'll adjust his points cost or anything like that, but he did get significantly more dangerous, tougher, and I'd say more use for his special rule. His toughness increased from 9 to 10, which with 14 wounds and a 2+ save, I think that gets him to the point where it's genuinely fairly tanky for 190 points. It will make a big difference against things like melter guns. His Torrent Claw attack at range picked up anti-vehicle 4+, which is maybe a little bit whatever, but I suppose on theme. The really big boost came to that scary Forge Hammer thing though. He gets 6 attacks at Strength 14, AP 2 and Damage 3 with anti-vehicle 4+ and devastating wounds. Really quite a turnaround from what he was before, given that he was previously Strength 9 and AP 1, which was just ridiculously underwhelming for an avatar of a god of the Forge. His sweep profile was also slightly boosted as well, that went to Strength 8 over Strength 7. Really nice just to see some solid stat line boost there, at least he's fighting as good or better than a Demon Prince now, rather than flatly worse. And he also had a change to his special rule, where he swapped out his debuff and enemy vehicle type rule for one that makes him a bit trickier to shoot. If enemies shoot him within 18 inches, their weapons gain the hazardous ability, so that could really make you think twice about trying to destroy him with some scary heavy weapons at point blank range. I feel like that's quite a nice one really, just going off passively and affecting everything means it could be annoying enough if the opponent really needs to focus him down. You could just get a bit of chip damage on a few different units if everything is lining up to hurt him. Overall seems interesting enough. Maybe that +1 strength aura could be interesting enough in the Soulforge War Pack. I was a bit disappointed he didn't gain the vehicle keyword or anything like that though. It means that while he can buff the demon engines and things within that Warpack formation, he can't use any of the synergies himself pretty much. Next up, and sticking with the scary Chaos Iron and mechanisms, we've got the Fellhammer Siege Host. This one's the Iron Warriors themed detachment, and their core rule is Iron Fortitude, very much Iron within and Iron without here. The core rule for this one is a big durability boost, giving you a -1 to wound on any non-damned units if the strength of the enemy's attack is greater than the toughness of your model being attacked. That's a genuinely very good durability boost. Often things in Warhammer 40k tend to be most efficient when they're firing against something that they wound on a 3+. Putting that all down to a 4+ will certainly impact enemy firepower. Typically in normal circumstances, it's a big 33% durability boost against that kind of attack, and a slightly smaller one against anything that was wounding you on a 2 already. It's really quite a big one to have army-wide, and maybe incentivizes slightly more mid-toughness things maybe. I guess if you've got a unit that's got at least somewhat lower toughness and is also durable, maybe things like Chosen, Possessed or Terminators, then you're quite likely to trigger that buff a lot of the time. It still looks like it'd be good for vehicles and demon engines though, they're often going to be wounded on 3s anyway with things like las cannons. Overall I'd rate that one as a really solid core rule. Otherwise, the siege host gets some really fun stratagems as well. There's one called Brutal Attrition, where if the enemy allocates a bunch of attacks to you, you can deal a bunch of mortal wounds in return. Basically, kind of equivalent to the grenade stratagem if it gets maxed out. 6 dice, each 4 plus, dealing a mortal wound. That could be quite a nice one if the enemy is in a position just to wipe out your unit wholesale and stack tons of attacks on you. Otherwise though, I feel like these three are some of the more impactful ones. For 1 CP, you can gain the pistol keyword on all your ranged weapons besides blast weapons. That one's a battle tactic, and it just means that you can fire away in engagement range. Things like Obliterators, Havocs, or Terminators could open fire with their weapons before fighting in combat. And I guess that could also be a way of ignoring the big guns never tire sort of penalty for vehicles. Probably one of the standout ones though is Steadfast Determination, 1 command point for 5 plus feel no pain for non-damned units against any enemy shooting. That one just seems like a pretty spectacular reactive durability boost. Really good on big single models with a lot of wounds in particular. Against them it'll be essentially 50% extra durability, which is massive for 1 CP. It'd certainly be a slog to take down any sort of mid-sized vehicle with that on the go, plus the detachment rule hopefully ruining some wound rolls. Finally, they also have a Siegecraft one, a -2 to charge for 1 enemy unit nominated when they get charged. That should mean that the enemies really have to think twice about whether they're going to be able to have any chance of charging you out of reserve, and could be very impactful for other long charges as well. Overall seems like a pretty fun and flavourful little rule set. Extra durability Chaos Space Marines seem to be a thing here, it would seem. There are a lot of datasheet changes in the codex, but here are just a few of the more standout ones to start with. While I'd say that the detachments are broadly good news, as you get all sorts of interesting different options and ways to play, I feel like the datasheet changes are far more mixed. Some things genuinely gained some pretty big abilities, some things took some hefty nerfs in one way or the other, and to be honest, the strength of any one unit will have to be determined after we see the digital points download, as at this point we don't know how much is going to change or stay the same. Just for a few more standout changes though, Obliterators got locked to 2 model units right now. Previously you could take either 2 or 4 of them, and that definitely makes them a lot less useful overall for targeting with stratagems. Having a big 360 point unit just drop out of deep strike and nuke something was pretty massive. So I guess if you want to go heavy on Obliterators, you'd be taking 6 max now it would seem. Warp Talons on the other hand got a kind of horrendous looking boost. Their rule now is that they can go into reserve at the end of any fight phase, which I feel like probably was an oversight on Games Workshop's part. For the most part, these rules that allow you to go back into reserve tend to happen in the enemy fight phase, not yours, and this basically means that you could have a big 10-man Warp Talon squad charge something, lightly kill it with their million lightning claw attacks, and then after they've done so, jump back into the sky provided there's nothing left in engagement range, and the enemy can't attack them. Then after they've done their movement, use rapid ingress to bring them in back in the enemy turn, somewhere where they can't be shot behind terrain, and then use their good movement to jump out again and murder something else and repeat the whole thing. For each time you did all that, you would need to spend 1 CP on rapid ingress. That feels like you could potentially have a Warp Talon unit that just literally jumps on and off the board, deleting an enemy unit, and there's basically nothing they can do about it bar Overwatch. You just need to make sure that you picked your targets right and it was something they could actually kill. At first glance that looks problematic to the extent where I suspect it might get FAQs, but otherwise if they choose not to, then that seems kind of brutal. If they do FAQ it, I suppose it might change back to just going off the board at the end of the enemy turn, so they do get a turn to deal some damage to you in return. Otherwise, it was bad news for the cultist mob. Unfortunately, they lost access to autoguns and their special weapons. Looks like due to Games Workshop only selling a squad with the combat weapons now, you can no longer get the firearms. This really is quite a nerf to them, as their special weapons did actually add a bit of threat to the unit. You've got things like flamers and grenade launchers, which could stack a bit of damage against enemy infantry. Means that even more so than before, the cultist mobs are just not going to be any sort of credible threat now. They're literally going to be there for extra bodies and putting their special rule down to mark sticky objectives on things, which was definitely still their primary purpose before, but now they're just not going to be doing as much damage incidentally as they do so. Otherwise, looks like the Master of Possession loses his 6+ Feel No Pain type boost, and that's quite a shame for him given that really helped out with Possess being hit by flat damage 3 type weapons, and the Thelgor Beastmen have had their special rule shifted around a bit. Previously they got a charge boost type special rule, now they've got one where you can arrive from strategic reserves round 1. It does happen in your movement phase though, so you can't use it for rapid ingress, and it does look like that's come at the expense of their scout special rule, which they no longer have. It looks like the accursed cultists ran off with that particular keyword. Looking forward to digging into the datasheet changes a little bit more. I'll certainly go through everything individually when I do the full codex review. Finally, last but not least, we have the Pactbound Zealots. This is the reinterpretation of the Slaves to Darkness type detachment, and as mentioned, it did get nerfs. To be fair, it was a detachment that had just some monstrously strong detachment rules compared with most other things before. Maybe the nerfs are to try and make sure it doesn't dominate over the other ones, and then they can just adjust chaos points costs for the positive or negative to make sure they're strong overall. It flipped from being a more generic Chaos one to slight more theming around the word bearers, and you still have the big system where you mark all your units to Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh or Undivided, and they give much the same buffs as they did before. The downside though is that now if you fail your Dark Pact leadership test, then you don't get this additional benefit if you've taken those mortal wounds. It means say if you had a Vindicator that was Nurgle marked to get the sustained hits on a 5+ critical rule, you would now need to pass that leadership test. If you fail it, you both take the mortal wounds and just get the regular sustained hits on 6s as per Dark Pacts. You don't get this boosted bit. That definitely is a nerf. As mentioned, with leadership things you're typically failing about a quarter of the time. So that does mean that there's a good chunk of the time when this just isn't going to be relevant. Overall though, I still think it's looking like a good detachment. For other changes they had, the Nurgle and Undivided stratagems are pretty the same as they were in the January errata. So just the wound rerolls for Undivided and Nurgle block shooting to 18 inches. All the enhancements unfortunately got a little bit worse in their own ways, often meaning that they needed to pass the leadership test to gain the effect. They swapped out that 2CP Armour of Contempt style rule for a character buffing option. Feels like the character's kind of ascending to demonhood, where if their unit wipes out an enemy unit, the character just basically gets all their stats improved by 1, drawing the eye of the Chaos Gods, which I think is all very fun and fluffy and genuinely quite dangerous. Otherwise, one rule from the January errata that wasn't reprinted here is the requirement for marked units to go in transports of the same mark. I guess that's not going to be a thing anymore, so you could mix up things like rhinos with a Nurgle mark and undivided contents, as people were doing in the past with Chosen. I guess they could add that back in via the balanced data slate if they wanted to, but we'll see on that front. Overall, really quite a lot of big changes for Codex Chaos Space Marines. Certainly a few nerfs to the index options, though a lot of the other detachments are looking really quite good fun in my opinion. Both Veterans of the Long War and Fellhammer look really quite cool. I really like those Alpha Legion stratagems as well. I quite like the way that a lot of these do feel like you could just take a generic Chaos Space Marine army and legitimately just play it with the different detachments, as opposed to most of the detachments being locked to all sorts of different keyworded units, as with other codexes. I feel like this is nice to have the option, as opposed to having things too pinned down to just literally certain models that you might not have excessive amounts of to justify that detachment. Quite nice to see some datasheet improvements for Cypher and Vashtorr as well. They were both models that I thought were lacking a little bit of danger and damage. In any case, looking forward to your thoughts and ideas, and as mentioned, if you are looking to pick up any of the Chaos Battle Forces, Codexes or other bits, check out the links in the video description when they go live. They should be able to give a discount versus Games Workshop, and there are plenty of other discount retailers around the world to check out as well, of course. Feel free to check back on Auspex Tactics for more videos later. Hopefully the Codex review should be one of the next ones I put out. I might do one talking through the Chaos Battle Forces that I prepped earlier in the week before that though. In any case, plenty more 40k videos to come. I do tend to post new ones most days. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all of these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the big prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.